My family owns a small cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. My parents love hiking and camping, which is why they decided to buy the place before I was even born. The cabin is nothing fancy, just a modest structure surrounded by thick woods and a gravel road that leads up to it. It's showing its age now, with creaky floors and drafty windows, but my dad takes pride in maintaining it. He often talks about tearing it down and building a new one, but that's a conversation I leave between him and Mom. This story takes place about 12 years ago when I was 9, and my older sister Emma was 12. We were up at the cabin for a winter break trip, and a heavy snowstorm hit. The snow was so deep that the roads were barely passable, so we had to stay close to the cabin. Emma and I loved it because it meant we could spend hours outside playing in the snow. Our favorite game was one we invented, Snow Siege. We'd build forts out of snow and use them as bases. The goal was to steal a treasure, usually a big snowball we'd mark with food coloring, from the other's fort and bring it back to your base without getting hit by snowballs. Emma set up her fort at the edge of a nearby clearing, while I built mine closer to the cabin. Once we were ready, Emma ran off to prepare her base, and I waited for her signal to start. She usually whistled when she was ready, but this time, I waited, and waited. After about 10 minutes, I decided she must have started without me. I wasn't about to let her get the upper hand, so I decided to head toward her fort. Instead of trudging through the woods, which felt eerie in the storm, I opted for the gravel road that looped around to the clearing. The snow was nearly up to my knees, but I pressed on, my scarf wrapped tightly around my face. When I reached the edge of the clearing, I saw Emma's fort, but no sign of her. That wasn't unusual. She liked to hide and ambush me, so I approached cautiously. As I neared her fort, I noticed footprints in the snow leading toward a small cabin deeper in the woods. It was a rental property that no one seemed to use during the winter. Curious, I followed the trail. When I got closer, I saw a woman standing on the porch of the cabin. She was older, with grayish hair pulled back into a bun, and she smiled when she saw me. "Are you looking for your sister?" she called out. Her voice was kind, but somehow unsettling. "Yes," I replied, stopping in my tracks. "She came up to the house," the woman said. "You should come in too, it's freezing out here." That didn't make sense. Why would Emma go into a stranger's cabin? I hesitated, glancing at the footprints. There were 2 sets now, one leading up to the house and another going back toward the woods. Just then, I heard heavy footsteps from inside the cabin, and the smile on the woman's face dropped. I instinctively backed away. "Emma!" I shouted at the top of my lungs, hoping she was nearby. The woman's expression changed to frustration, and she yelled something toward the cabin, but I didn't wait to find out what. I turned and bolted, running through the snow as fast as I could. My heart pounded as I reached the gravel road. I heard someone shout behind me, but I didn't look back. When I got to our cabin, my dad and Emma were outside, looking worried. Apparently, Emma had decided to come back to the cabin and forgot to tell me. She told Dad about the woman in the cabin who had also called out to her, inviting her inside. Hearing this, my dad grabbed a flashlight and his hunting knife and went to check it out while Emma and I stayed inside with Mom. He came back an hour later looking pale. The cabin was locked, but he found fresh footprints leading to and from the back door. Later, we learned from a neighbor that the cabin wasn't supposed to be occupied. The owners lived out of state and hadn't rented it out in months. The police were called, but they didn't find anyone inside or any signs of a break-in. Still, the whole thing left my family shaken. After that winter, Emma and I stopped playing in the woods near that cabin. Even now, whenever I think about what might have happened if either of us had stepped inside, I get chills. Before the next story, if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any of these terrifying stories. I've been snowboarding for as long as I can remember. My dad was obsessed with it when he was younger, and when he met my mom, she got hooked too. Naturally, they passed their love of the slopes down to my siblings and me. Growing up, we spent every winter weekend at one mountain or another. By the time I hit my early 20s, I had pretty much mastered the sport. This story took place 3 winters ago, when I was 22 and a few months away from graduating college. My friends and I had planned a weekend snowboarding trip to Colorado. The crew was me, Mason, Caleb, and Alex. Mason booked the trip, and Alex drove, so I can't tell you exactly which mountain we went to, but it was huge. It had at least 6 chairlifts, multiple peaks, and dozens of trails. If I had to guess, it was probably Keystone or Breckenridge. The first day was a blast. The mountain had fresh powder from a recent storm, and we hit as many runs as possible before calling it a day. By the second day, we had scoped out our favorite trails and planned to spend the day tackling the hardest ones. Mason, being the thrill seeker, suggested we push our limits. Caleb and Alex weren't hard to convince, especially after we knocked back a couple of those tiny whiskey bottles Mason always sneaks onto the lifts. The day was winding down, and the lifts were about to close in an hour. We were hanging out at the top of a trail, debating whether to squeeze in one last run or head down to the lodge, when two girls approached us. One had dark, wavy hair, and the other was blonde with a bright smile. They introduced themselves as Erica and Jess. It's worth mentioning that they were stunning, the kind of people who make you do a double take. They told us they were bored because the mountain was mostly families and older skiers. I'd noticed the same thing earlier, so their story checked out. Erica seemed particularly interested in Caleb's board, which was a custom model he'd saved up for. Jess, on the other hand, was teasing Mason about his whiskey stash and jokingly called him an amateur. She pulled out her own flask, claiming she had something better. Against my better judgment, we all took a swig. It burned more than I expected, and I couldn't place the taste. Mason and Alex took a couple of extra sips, but I decided to pace myself. Something about the situation felt off. Erica and Jess were charming, sure, but it didn't make sense why they'd choose to hang out with us. A bunch of college guys they'd never met. Then Erica asked if we'd ever ridden a trail called Shadow Ridge. None of us had heard of it, but she described it as an off-map glade run that was rarely open. For those unfamiliar, glades are trails that cut through the forest, weaving between trees. They're tricky, but exhilarating. Intrigued, we agreed to follow them. The trail wasn't accessible from a lift, so we had to unclip our boards and hike. As we climbed, I noticed how quiet the woods were. The fresh snow hadn't been touched, and there was no one else around. Caleb and Alex were up ahead, laughing with the girls, while Mason and I hung back. I leaned over and whispered to Mason that this felt weird. He shrugged it off, saying we'd be fine. We eventually reached a clearing, where the terrain sloped downward into the forest. Erica and Jess pointed out the start of the run. Caleb and Alex were eager to go, but Mason hesitated. He asked if they were sure it was safe, and Erica laughed, saying we'd all make it down in one piece. Jess then pulled out her flask again, insisting we take another drink before starting. Everyone obliged except for me. I pretended to drink but let most of it spill into the snow. As we clipped into our boards and prepared to ride, the girls took off, shouting for us to keep up. Caleb and Alex followed immediately, with Mason close behind. Reluctantly, I brought up the rear. The trail was steep and narrow, with trees crowding the sides. It was challenging but manageable, and for a moment I forgot how uneasy I'd felt. When I reached the bottom, I saw Caleb and Alex slumped in the snow. Mason was kneeling next to them, shaking them and calling their names. Erica and Jess stood a few feet away, watching. I raced over, unclipping my board, and checked on my friends. They were breathing but unresponsive. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded. Erica and Jess looked at each other, then back at me. Erica smirked and said, "They'll be fine. You should worry about yourself." That's when I noticed two men emerging from the trees, each carrying a pair of snowboards. My stomach dropped. Realizing we were in serious danger, I grabbed Mason's arm and whispered, "We need to go. Now." He nodded, and we hoisted Caleb and Alex up as best as we could. The men didn't chase us, but their presence was enough to spur us into action. We trudged back uphill, using the tracks we'd left in the snow to find our way. Caleb and Alex eventually regained consciousness, though they were groggy and confused. When we finally made it back to the lodge, we reported the incident to the ski patrol. They promised to investigate, but we never heard any updates. To this day, I don't know who Erica and Jess were, or what their real plan was. All I know is that we narrowly escaped something far worse than losing our snowboards. The experience left us shaken, and we haven't been back to that mountain since. Before the next story, if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe so that you don't miss any of these terrifying stories. Every winter, my friends Ethan, Marcus, and I have this odd little tradition. We trek out to this frozen reservoir about 30 minutes from town, just to walk on the ice and take in the stillness. It's nothing flashy or even particularly exciting, but there's something about being out there in the quiet, with the snow falling around you, that feels like you've stepped into another world. It's peaceful in a way nothing else is, and the photos always turn out incredible. This happened last winter, right after New Year's. It was early January, and the reservoir had been frozen solid for weeks. That night, a fresh layer of snow was falling, the kind that glows under a full moon. Ethan had driven, his SUV handling the snow-covered roads like a champ, while Marcus kept cracking dumb jokes to keep the mood light. It was late, probably close to 1 a.m., when we pulled into the empty parking lot by the trailhead. The reservoir is surrounded by a stretch of woods that separates it from the road. The trees aren't dense, but they're enough to block the view of the water until you're right at the edge. We bundled up against the cold and set off, the crunch of snow under our boots the only sound. Marcus lit a cigarette as we walked, the smoke curling up into the frosty air. When we reached the water, the reservoir looked like a vast, untouched canvas. Ethan picked up a rock and hurled it onto the ice. It skittered across the surface without so much as a crack, which was all the confirmation we needed. We stepped out onto the frozen expanse, careful but confident. We didn't go far, maybe 50 or 60 yards out, before stopping to just take it all in. That's when we saw it. On the far side of the reservoir, near the tree line, something was moving. At first, it looked like a shadow shifting in the snow, but as it got closer, we realized it was a person, or at least we thought it was. They were hunched over and dragging something behind them. "Is that a bear?" Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. I shook my head, my heart already racing. It wasn't moving like a bear. It was too upright, too deliberate. As the figure drew closer to the ice, the moonlight caught on something shiny, and we could see it clearly. It was a man, wearing what looked like a crudely made bear costume. Not a cute or funny one either. This was ragged and dirty, like something out of a bad dream. "What the hell is he doing?" Ethan muttered. None of us could answer. The man reached the edge of the ice, dragging a small black duffel bag behind him. He stopped, knelt down, and started slamming something into the ice. The dull, rhythmic thuds echoed across the reservoir, and I swear I could feel the vibrations under my feet, even from that distance. It didn't take long to figure out what he was doing. He was trying to break through the ice. And whatever was in that bag, he was planning to dump it. "Okay, we're leaving," Ethan said firmly, his voice low but urgent. We turned and started walking back toward the shore, trying not to make any noise. Every step felt like thunder in the silence. I glanced over my shoulder once and froze. The man had stopped what he was doing and was standing upright, staring in our direction. "Hey!" he shouted. His voice was sharp and carried easily over the snow. We bolted. The three of us sprinted toward the woods, the icy air burning our lungs. I didn't look back, too scared of what I might see. When we reached the tree line, we didn't stop. We tore through the snow until we hit the trailhead and Ethan's SUV. None of us spoke until we were in the car and speeding away. "What the hell was that?" Marcus finally said, his voice shaky. I didn't have an answer. None of us did. Ethan said maybe it was someone dumping trash, but I shut that idea down immediately. Who wears a bear costume in the middle of winter to toss garbage into a frozen lake? Marcus suggested it might have been a body, but the bag looked too small for that. We argued about it the entire drive home, but none of our theories made sense. A few days later, I saw something on the news that made my stomach drop. It was a report about a missing child from a nearby town. The timeline of the disappearance lined up eerily well with what we had seen that night. I don't know if it was connected. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but it's hard not to wonder. We eventually told the police what we saw. They took our statement, but I haven't heard anything since. I still think about that man in the bear suit, slamming a hole into the ice, and I can't help but shiver. Whatever he was doing, I hope I never find out.